Greetings from the Freedom Wellbeing Institute. My name is Susan Stevenson. Welcome to this Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool webinar. By way of background, this webinar is one of the outcomes, or talks about one of the outcomes of a 16-year wellbeing research program that we have been conducting with the New Zealand Curriculum Design Institute in New Zealand. Emerging from that research program has been the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool. When the research began, by way of background, we were looking for an evidence-based wellbeing model and practices that could support understandings and measurable improvements in wellbeing. We wanted to progress engagement, participation, retention, achievement, productivity and equity in higher education and other settings. The research addressed 4 questions. What is wellbeing? How is wellbeing influenced? How can wellbeing be measured? And how can wellbeing be improved over time? We used a diverse range of methods to find answers to those questions. They included themed literature reviews, meta-theory reviews, use-inspired practice research, what we would call traditional research methods, quantitative and qualitative, mixed method investigations, and also impact evaluation and grounded theory. There have been 4 findings from this extensive wellbeing research program. We located, or from the program emerged, the Universal Wellbeing Model, then the Universal Determinants, or Universal Wellbeing Determinants, a Universal Wellbeing Definition, and, what we'll be talking about today in more depth, the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool. Usually the Universal Wellbeing Model is shown like this, but I warn you this only shows 2 of the 4 components of the model, the sensory inputs and the dimensions. Just to give you some background to the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool, I'll first explain a little bit about the Universal Wellbeing Model because the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool is underpinned and based upon this model. Now, the Universal Wellbeing Model explains that our well-being is impacted by sensory inputs that we experience over time. That is, things we see, hear, smell, taste and touch during real-life experiences and digital experiences. Both of these can influence the status of our well-being. So when these different inputs come into us, then what happens is those inputs go to our brain for the brain to process. The first things that our brain does when it receives sensory inputs, it scans to see if any of those inputs are telling us that there is some sort of impending danger. If the brain identifies some kind of threat or danger, we will immediately behave in a way to reduce that threat. So, for example, if we are out at the barbecue and a log of wood falls out of the barbecue at our feet, our skin will immediately sense the heat and our brain will get that message and it will get us to move away from that burning object. And this kind of identification and reaction to threats, our brain does this without often any kind of conscious thought. It is just happening so rapidly in what we call the executive part of the brain. Now, if our brain doesn't sense some kind of threat, it still continues to process the inputs that come in, and it looks at those inputs and it starts to interpret what do these things we're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting and touching actually mean for us. So for example, we might enter a restaurant and hear lovely music, smell beautiful smells. We might hear someone greeting us from the other side of the room. And so we may have a sense of pleasure, and our brain may interpret this as a safe place to be, a place where we can experience delicious food and lots of enjoyable time with our friends. Depending on how the brain interprets these inputs, it will then uh, take those interpretations and they'll be manifest as behaviours. Now, these behaviours could be social behaviours, physical behaviours, intellectual behaviours, cultural or ethnic, emotional or spiritual. We may feel a welling of pleasure because we realise this restaurant we've arrived at, someone's organised a surprise party for us. And so we might have elevated emotions, our breath might speed up because we're excited about what we're seeing. So then we can react to the inputs, and our brain will guide us as to the actions to take or the behaviours that we will then undertake. Now, through our research, we've identified that scary number, there are 70 behaviours that ultimately determine the state of our universal well-being. And they are listed here, and initially when you see them it can be a bit overwhelming. But each one of these determinants, each one of these behaviours can be something positive that supports our universal well-being, or it could also be something negative. For example, self-talk, which is the very first determinant mentioned, refers to the kind of internal conversations that we have with ourselves. So we may, for example, when we arrive at that restaurant and see the sights we see and hear the words we hear and smell the smells, our self-talk might go, no, this cannot possibly be a birthday party for me, nobody likes me. So our self-talk could be quite negative, or it could be that our self-talk goes, this is wonderful, I know my friends love me and care about me, and I should have expected that they would do something like this for me. So self-talk can be positive and supportive, but it can also be negative. In fact, it could go on such a negative track that we might become depressed to the point where we're really in serious trouble, or we may even see no purpose in being alive. So all of these behaviours that are listed there have the ability to be positive or negative. So these determinants are very important, and they actually form the basis of what I'm going on to talk about, which is the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool. Now finally, the Universal Wellbeing Model has to be understood and interpreted using these principles. And they set out that if we're using this model, we have to bear in mind that we need to look at it and look at any information we get from it in a holistic way. We need to understand that the model includes all of these parts and that they're all integrated together and they are linked to each other. We need to understand that all the different parts of the model are actually of equal importance and work towards balanced development. We also need to understand that the wellbeing model can actually help us to identify strengths and talents as well as areas of harm or possible harm, and there could be some areas which don't really have a great deal of impact on our universal wellbeing at all. Finally, the principles encourage us to understand that this model is designed to be responsive to diverse people and collectives. So regardless of your ethnicity, culture, beliefs, gender, age, and so on, the model is designed to be able to be usable and pertinent to you. So here's a picture of the whole model shown, and the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool that was developed a couple of years after the Universal Wellbeing Model is largely underpinned by those 70 determinants of universal well-being. So the Universal Wellbeing Tool is actually a questionnaire, and but a very complex and comprehensive questionnaire. And so people can gain access to that. They can email us, and they can actually get access to the secure website where it's held, and they can move through the questions on the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool, and then a report comes back, and they will be able to go through this report with an accredited facilitator so they can understand exactly the information the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool has revealed about them, have a discussion of it, and then a final report is actually formulated. And that gives the person who receives it understandings about where they have talents and strengths, where they have possible harms happening or definite harms happening. It can also identify a large number of other things. So please note this evaluation tool has been used with diverse people from over the age of 8. It's been digitised, and it was nationally launched in New Zealand in what we call Tech Week in 2024. And in 2024, we also started offering professional Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool facilitator accreditation programs. So these programs qualify people to do the administration, analysis, and reporting of the outcomes of this Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool. And that could be with an individual or a group of people or a family. So the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool has the ability to identify the status of the 70 wellbeing influencing determinants. It identifies strengths and talents. It can identify where harm may or is occurring. It can identify the impact of each of the dimensions. For example, the social dimension might be an area that is really of great concern to you, or it might be a strength. The evaluation can also determine the extent and the type of influence we might be experiencing from our home, work, and or study place setting. So it could be that some of these support our well-being, and it could be that others are quite harmful. The tool also can identify risks, particularly of physical violence or suicidal ideation. And learning about and using this Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool can empower people to make changes, and its major purpose is actually to prevent poor well-being. Just some key points about the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool. It is confidential, the information is completely secure, and it cannot be shared with anyone except the person who did the evaluation and their facilitator without them actually giving written permission. The Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tools are always analysed by professional and accredited facilitators, and they can support people to understand individual reports, or an organisation might have had Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool evaluations carried out on a whole team of staff. These facilitators can also support organisations to understand the outcomes of organisational, what we call data summary reports. The whole process of doing a Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool is designed to help people to develop their wellbeing literacy, or the literacy level of people in an organisation. So it's really about building people's capacity to look after their own universal wellbeing. The entire system is privacy and cyber protected, and when people do the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool, they're also invited to allow the data, the numerical data, to be contributed to ongoing research that we are conducting, and this is completely optional. So the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool data summaries, which give information about what's happening to the universal well-being of whole groups of people within a family or a team or an organisation, they create an evidence base to support decision making, and they can foster an organisation to start a whole of organisation universal wellbeing literacy and support program, and this would be designed to increase productivity, to move certain achievements that the organisation might have and identify, and also perhaps equity outcomes. The tool can also help organisations to do before and after evaluations, so they can see what people's universal wellbeing levels are at the beginning, and then they can see whether or not the supports and interventions they've actually put in place are working by evaluating the state of people after that. The system is quick, low cost, accurate, and it prevents poor universal wellbeing. Too often organisations move from crisis to crisis, event to event, which is very expensive, dealing with things that happen as a result of poor well-being. It could be a suicide, it could be complaints, it could be workplace satisfaction, it could be low productivity levels, and too often organisations are experiencing these without actually getting on top of them and actually being proactive and preventing them. And this is the sort of thing the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation Tool data summary reports for organisations can do. At its endpoint and most advanced level, the Universal Wellbeing Evaluation data summaries can actually help organisations to foster positive, caring and engaged culture. Not only do people learn about their own universal wellbeing level, they also begin to understand how they impact and might be influencing the universal well-being of other people in their workplace. So, great advantage of these data summary reports for organisation. They identify strengths, needs, opportunities and risks. They give people an evidence base from which to make decisions. They promote prevention of poor well-being, and they also promote systems and futures thinking by that organisation. This allows them to reach aspirations they may have only dreamed about in the past. If you would like to learn more or enrol, we do run these programs. The Certificate in Universal Wellbeing is a 12-session program. It includes within it an opportunity to actually undertake a universal wellbeing evaluation, but we also have other programs which provide professional level education and accreditations to use other parts of the universal wellbeing system. If you would like a program prospectus or free resources, you can just jump on our website. There's a copy of our model in black and white amongst our free resources, so you can just download that and use it, or you can go to our shop if you want a colour one. Perhaps you want to make a poster to go on the wall. If you're interested in learning more about our organisational wellbeing systems, there's a whole section on our website about that. If in fact you would like to work in some kind of partnership with us, please just send an email to the email address on the screen at the moment.